Hi you guys. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. Today I'm going to be talking about my birth story. I shared it on Instagram a while back. I'm putting my birth story here on YouTube, just talking about it so that you can always go back and look to it if you ever want to, but I get tons of questions about it all the time, so I'm just gonna talk about it. So I started contracting around 9 p.m. on Wednesday, October 20th. I thought that it was just another round of prodromal labor. I had had so much false labor, prodromal labor, contractions that would start, dilate me a little bit, but then stop. I had so much of that and it was very frustrating, and so whenever I started contracting, I really thought that it was just more prodromal labor. It was very slow progressing, I would say, at first, so I really just thought that it was a bunch of strong Braxton Hicks. And it's actually kind of funny, I literally sat down to do my nails. I still had Halloween nails on and I didn't want to always look back at the pictures and see Halloween nails. I wanted the regular nails, and I was like, okay, well, if it is labor, then I need to do my nails. About halfway through doing my nails, I realized that my contractions were definitely getting more intense and maybe a little bit closer together. So at that point, we decided to do a bunch of different things, try to see if any of them would get the contractions to stop, because that would kind of prove that they were Braxton Hicks and not real contractions. I got in the bath, I was walking around, drinking a bunch of water, all these things to try and see if it was just Braxton Hicks or if they were not going away, and nothing stopped the contractions. I still wasn't convinced that I was in labor because I thought it would be like that excruciating pain that everybody talks about, and like right off the bat I really thought that it was just gonna be this unbearable, undeniable, clear contraction, but it was just uncomfortable for a while. It wasn't exactly like super painful, which is why I just thought it was more Braxton Hicks. So a couple hours goes by and I'm still having contractions. At this point I probably should have started to realize like it's been hours and I'm still having contractions, but I was so wrapped up in the consistency. In my brain they had to be exactly 3 minutes apart every single time, and that's like not exactly true, come to find out. But I was so wrapped up in the consistency that I just was totally ignoring everything else, and I was like, no, like it's not, we don't need to go to the hospital. So I continued to just wait. Charles had to get up and open the next day at work, so he was like, I'm gonna start trying to go to sleep. Fast forward to 1 a.m. and I'm still sitting next to him, at this point pretty much moaning in pain, I guess. No, I'm gonna say moaning in discomfort because they were getting more intense. Charles never actually got to bed. At that point he tells me that he really thinks that I am in labor, and he said that he had watched me cope with them less and less, have more and more struggle with it. I was still hesitant because in my gut I just knew that we were gonna get there and there was gonna be no progress, and they were gonna tell me I wasn't in labor and that we were gonna get sent home, and for some reason I just was so paranoid that I was gonna go to the hospital thinking I'm in labor and get sent home, and I just couldn't deal with any extra disappointment because I had been so disappointed and in the dumps for the longest time because I was so sick of being pregnant and I was so ready for him to come, and in my head I was like, there's no way that he's gonna come on time, he's gonna be late, and I was just so wrapped up in all of it. But Charles convinced me that if it hit 2 a.m. and I was still having frequent contractions, that we were just gonna go get checked because we'd rather get checked and sent home than not get checked and have a baby at home. So 2 a.m. rolls around and my contractions are 2 to 3 minutes apart with no sign of stopping, so we grab all of our hospital bags and start heading to the hospital. In the car is when everything started to get very real. When we were driving to the hospital, my contractions got a lot more painful. Charles was laughing at me because of the way that I was moaning through them, but we just kept talking about how crazy it was that we may be coming home with a baby. Like, this could be the last time we leave the house without a baby. But like I said, the contractions were definitely picking up in the car, and at that point I was starting to be a little bit more convinced that it might be labor and I may get admitted while we're there. It was just very much so becoming a feeling I had never felt before, and I couldn't describe it. I kept trying to describe it to Charles and I could not describe it. I just knew that this had to be it because of the way that everything was just increasing. The biggest thing about the contractions is I could feel the wave of it. I could feel it start to come on and build, hit a peak, and then taper off. I could feel that, like 100%, and I would know when a contraction was coming. That's a big way that I was like, maybe I am in labor. We get to the hospital and fill out whatever we need to fill out at the beginning, get put into a triage room, and they come to do the first check to see where we are even at. And as I had suspected, there was no change from my doctor's appointment that I believe was the day before. There was no change, and so I was already getting super discouraged because I was like, huh? Like, what do you mean? At that point, I had been contracting from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. and none of it dilated my cervix at all. But they had me hooked up to the monitor so they could see that I was in labor on paper. Like, on paper, it looked like I was in labor. The contractions were super close together, super frequent, consistent. The nurse told me to try to focus on relaxing my lower half of my body because she said that every every time I had a contraction and tensed up, I was almost pushing my cervix up from being tense. Bentley couldn't push down on my cervix to dilate it, if that makes any sense, because I was like holding him up by tensing up. I don't know. We sat there for the next hour or so just being monitored to try to see if there was any change within that hour, to see if I was really in labor or try to figure out what was going on. It was very hard to just sit there that whole time, and the contractions were so painful and so close together, and it felt like I did not get a break because pretty much the entire time that I was in labor, they were like 2 minutes apart. There was not a time that I recall that they were even longer than 5 minutes apart. It's just when they started, they were so close and didn't stop, and it was so exhausting. So the nurse came back to see if I had made any progress after we sat there for a little bit. Surprisingly enough, I had actually dilated to a 2. I should have said when we got there, I had only been a 1.5. I was like almost 1.5. She came back, I was at a 2. So that kind of proved to them that I was progressing and dilating. It was just happening slowly. But after she did the check and she was calling my doctor, because she told me, she was like, well, you are a 2. I'm gonna call your doctor and see what she wants to do, because I was 39 weeks in 3 days. She was like, I'm gonna call your doctor, I'm gonna see what she wants to do, see if she wants to admit you or what. It does look like you're in labor, just early labor. So she leaves to go call the doctor, and every time that I would get a cervical check, obviously they use like a lot of goop to make it not hurt so bad, but every time I had a cervical check, I would always feel like I needed to wipe because it was so goopy, and I'm talking about even in pregnancy. This time I went to go wipe after my cervical check, and it was so bloody, like so bloody, worse than any period I've had. Now mind you, I usually wear like tampons in a period, but I just haven't seen that much blood come from down there in a very long time, and especially when I had been pregnant, and I never had any spotting during pregnancy or any blood at all during my pregnancy. It had just been a while since I saw blood like that. I immediately started crying and had so much anxiety. I thought something was wrong. I did not understand why I was bleeding, or I thought she did something wrong. I just didn't know what was going on, and Charles immediately had to literally come hold me because I was flipping out over this bleeding. And the nurse comes back and I asked her about it, and she was like, no, it's totally normal. And I was like, okay. After she calmed me down and comforted me that the bleeding was normal and that I wasn't losing the baby or anything, she tells me that my doctor does want to go ahead and admit me at 2 centimeters. And my entire world blew up because I was 100% expecting to be sent home because I wasn't 5 centimeters. She comes back in and says that they're admitting me, and I was like, whoa, we're really having a baby. Everything set in. I was like, nothing compares to them telling you that you're not leaving the hospital without a baby. Like, that shit is insane. But the reason that they were admitting me so early was because my contractions were so close together and I had shown some progression. They knew that I was in labor, they weren't having a busy night, and they also knew that I was planning on getting the epidural. So we were like, well, let's just go ahead, get admitted, get the pain dealt with, and start trying to relax so that my body could actually dilate. They prepped my IV and got us all ready and moved into labor and delivery. Oh my gosh, I'm literally gonna freaking cry. Like, I can just picture being wheeled in to the labor and delivery room and looking around. Literally, birth was the best day of my whole freaking life, and I'm gonna get emotional going through all the details. I had the shakes really bad. I think it was just because of my anxiety, because the typical reason for shakes is either when you're in the transitional stage of labor or from your epidural, and I had not experienced either one of those yet, and I was shaking so bad. And I just think that I had a lot of anxiety about everything. There's no telling what was about to happen. But they asked me if I wanted to go ahead and get the epidural, and I had said no at the beginning because I wanted to go as long as I could without it. We had decided that we were gonna wait a little bit and then do another cervical check, and my reasoning was that if I hadn't dilated at all by the next check, I was gonna go ahead and get the epidural to help me relax and hopefully dilate to avoid needing other intervention. But if I had gotten a check and progressed and was still feeling, you know, strong and whatnot, I was going to keep waiting on the epidural. They come back and they check me, and I still was at a 2. This was after another couple of hours. So I went ahead and I got the epidural, and that honestly did speed things along. The epidural went really well. The anesthesiologist, I talked about this in my Q&A, but the anesthesiologist was super helpful, awesome. He talked me through the whole thing. It didn't hurt. Getting the IV in my arm hurt more than the epidural. After I got the epidural, it was like immediate relief. I stopped feeling the contractions and then was able to sleep a little bit and relax, and I did start to dilate. After the epidural, things did start to pick up a little bit. I was dilating. I got all the way to like a 5, and then my doctor came to break my water to see if that would speed things along because it had already been hours. She kind of stretched me to a 6, but she said I wasn't sitting at a 6 on my own. So she does that, leaves leaves for a little bit, and then I was doing all these different positions trying to help dilate. I can't remember at what point we decided to add Pitocin, but we did end up using Pitocin because my body just was not dilating. So we kept upping the Pitocin after every single cervical check. We would do a cervical check, up the Pitocin because I hadn't changed, and then we would flip around and do all these positions to try to help me dilate and get the baby in the right position or a better position. Nothing was working. More hours go by and my doctor comes back to check on me, and my cervix is back to a 4. So at this point we're like, my cervix is closing. She said it was hardening as well. It wasn't doing what it was supposed to be doing, and she had told me that Bentley's head was starting to swell in my birth canal. This is when they started to bring up the potential of needing a C-section. When they brought that up, I lost my shit. Like, I started crying immediately, like bawling immediately, and almost hyperventilating. My blood pressure skyrocketed. My heart rate was higher than Bentley's, which was already at like 150, 160, and my heart rate was higher than that. They were immediately trying to get me to relax and calm down. They were trying to ask me like what I was so scared about so that they could try to help relieve that fear, but I couldn't even form sentences. I was just crying so hard. There are so many things about a C-section that scares me, and I just wasn't ready to face that reality as quickly as I was gonna need to. I spent the next couple of hours just laying there trying to stop crying and trying to calm down so that I didn't put Bentley in distress, but I was just sitting there crying and holding Charles's hand and trying all of these different positions to try to dilate, at this point feeling pretty much hopeless, sure of the fact that I was gonna have to get a C-section. So my doctor said that she was gonna come back in 45 minutes and she was gonna check and see with how long we had already been going at it. At this point, one of two things would happen. Either one, she would come back and there would be absolutely no progress and we would start to really talk about and look at getting a C-section. And then the other option was that she would come back and out of nowhere my body would dilate from 4 centimeters to 10 centimeters. We'd be able to push, you know, continue on with my birth as I wanted it to go. I was just so heartbroken and so sure that my body was not doing what it was supposed to, and I was gonna have to get a C-section, and I was so scared of all of the things that were happening. I really just thought there was no way that I was gonna go from 4 centimeters to 10 centimeters before my doctor came back. And I was just sitting there praying so hard and texting my mom, and Charles was praying so hard, and it was just an out of this world experience, those 45 minutes. My nurse was really, really helpful because she was so comforting and reassuring, and she helped me remember that I have rights. You know, I have decisions over my own body, and she told me that if I felt like my body just needed more time and the baby wasn't in stress, I wasn't in stress, if everything was good, I didn't have to allow a C-section. Like, I can say that I want more time and I can say no as long as we're both safe. That was honestly really helpful just to hear her say it. Like, of course I knew that, but to hear her say it, know that she would have my back on that, was very helpful. I had already pressed the button on my epidural to get an extra dose of pain medicine because it was just starting to hurt down in my cervix area again. It wasn't necessarily that I was feeling contractions, but my cervix was starting to hurt. Before we had pushed the button, my nurse wanted to check me to make sure that it wasn't that I was complete and ready to push, because a lot of times when people are ready for more epidural, it's because they're actually ready to push. So she wanted to check and make sure that that wasn't the case, and at this point I was still 4 centimeters. So she leaves for a little bit and I'm laying there and I'm like switching sides and I'm trying to figure out how to get comfortable, but it is just hurting so bad, and it just felt really sore. I thought that it was because I had had so many cervical checks because my labor was going so oddly that it was just sore, but that wasn't even what it was. It was just because my cervix was dilating so quickly. So I had pressed my button to like call for the nurse and have her come back in, and I was like, I'm sorry, I know that you were just in here, but honestly, can you see what's going on? I was like, I don't know what the deal is, but I'm just in so much pain and it is hurting so bad. And I had told her that I thought that my cervix was sore from all of the checks, and I had asked her to be super gentle when she had done the previous one when I got more epidural. So she looks at me and she was like, okay, I'm gonna be really gentle, but I want to do another cervical check if that's okay. So I was like, yeah, go for it, just be super gentle. And while she was doing the cervical check, she made this face that was kind of like just like a focused, almost confused face, and she looks at me and she tells me that I'm at 8 centimeters. She was like, don't get too excited, we're not there yet, and she wanted me to stay calm and relaxed so that my body could finish dilating the rest of the way. It looked like things were turning around and it looked like we were going to be able to avoid the C-section. She leaves the room and Charles just gives me the sweetest look of relief on his face because he knew what it meant to me. Like, he knew how relieving it was for me and that he didn't have to watch me go through something like that. But I looked at him and I just said like, no, like we're not getting excited yet. I didn't want to get my hopes up because I knew that there's always a chance that something could go wrong. So I just didn't want to be like, okay, like cool, we're in the green area now. I didn't want to get like gung-ho set on the fact that it was gonna end up going that way, because then if something happened, I would be that much more devastated. I just looked at Charles while I was bawling and just held his hand. 15 minutes later, she comes in to do the official check that my doctor was saying, like after the 45 minutes. We do that check and I was complete. I was 10 centimeters by the grace of God. I have no idea how that happened. Then I had the realization that I am about to have to push a human out of my lady bits. And that was equally as terrifying. I was in shock. Like I was literally just in shock that like it happened so fast. Like if you have given birth, you know truly what going from 4 to 10 in 45 minutes means. That was 1, painful, and 2, it's just so overwhelming and so fast. So the nurse got all of her stuff ready and we started doing practice pushes and then doing real pushes, and I ended up pushing for 1 hour and 20 minutes total. It was the hardest but most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. There were so many times while pushing, Charles was holding the back of my head to help me like put my chin down. I kept pushing back on his hand super hard because I wanted to push back and give up. Like I don't know how to explain it, but I just wanted to give up so bad so many times. I was like, there's no way, this hurts so bad and it was so hard, and I just felt like I had been at it for so long and that he was never gonna come out, and I was just losing it, you know, and I just wanted to give up. But I obviously did not have that choice. My doctor was actually on her way home from work and had to turn around and try to get to the hospital in time, and she literally walked in last minute. I could tell that the nurse was like kind of trying to stall, and she kept checking her watch and checking the door, and I could tell that I was close and that I was crowning and that we were kind of trying to stall. When you're 10 centimeters and you have a contraction, there is absolutely no waiting. Like you're pushing no matter what. You're pushing. Your body will not let you just not, because that shit is unbelievably painful if you don't push. So my doctor walks in and she's like rushing and throwing her purse down and throwing on scrub, getting everything all ready. The one thing she does before she catches the baby is I had like this one last push, and she was telling me not to push, which like I just said is quite miserable. And this was the most painful part of the entire labor and delivery. This was to prevent me from tearing upwards, okay? And so she jumps in and she tells me with the next contraction not to push. She takes her fingers and she puts them on my clit and she pushes down so hard to prevent that from tearing. Oh, I can almost, every time I talk about it, I can almost feel it. It was the worst pain of the entire experience. But with the next contraction after that, when I pushed, Bentley was born. He just slid out and it was the most relieving feeling of my entire life. And when they held him up, there's just no explaining it. I literally have chills. You probably can't tell. I can picture her holding him up, and he was so clean and he didn't have hardly any gunk on him, which was mind-blowing to me. My whole pregnancy, it was just so hard for me to grasp the fact that he was real in my tummy, and I carried kind of small too in a way. I just couldn't fathom where he was hiding. So when I got to actually see him, it was just mind-blowing. I was like, oh my God, he's real. He's in front of me. He's crying. He's healthy. It was unreal. I kept saying over and over again through my tears, like, oh my God, he's real. He's real. And the nurses were all laughing at me. I just couldn't believe he was here. So at 6:56 p.m., he made his arrival. He was 6 pounds, 12 ounces, 21.5 inches long. All of the fear left my body. All of the depression and the sadness and the misery that I dealt with in my pregnancy was all gone, and I had never been happier in my life, never felt more love in my life. When they say that when you have your kid you feel a whole new type of love, it's true. I did not know I was capable of loving something so much, and I have such bad cuteness aggression and I just want to eat his little cheeks because he's so cute. But it was the greatest day of my life, the greatest experience of my life. I would do it 1,000 times over again. That's basically it. I don't know what else to say now, but that was my birth story. All things considered, I still think that it was a positive experience. I still look back on it with nothing but positive thoughts. Yes, it was scary. Yes, it was full of a lot of hiccups, but it was a wonderful experience, and I am so excited to go through it again when that time is right. Not now, but I'm excited for when the time is right. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed. I hope that maybe this either calmed your nerves or helped you have a new expectation of something that could happen. Your cervix can start closing mid-labor, in case you didn't know that. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like. Make sure that you comment. If you're not subscribed already, make sure you're subscribed, and I will see you guys next week.